Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. President Biden sat down for an interview with Time magazine. Notice he's doing a lot of interviews off camera. I wonder why. And he said some things that truly should shock the conscience and beg the question, why in the hell have we continued to fund this genocide and slaughter of innocent Palestinians in Gaza if what President Biden told Time magazine is true? Let's read into what I thought was just shocking statements for the president to make, given that he's supporting this. Asked if Israeli forces have committed war crimes in Gaza, Biden says it's uncertain. Huh? From the start, the administration knew Israel was pushing the limits, you don't say, of legal warfare. The Washington Post and others have reported the conflict is driving a wedge between the U.S. and its allies. It's uncertain that they're committing war crimes? Well, you're the president of the United States. You are tasked with not only upholding the Constitution, but adhering to international law, even though that's a joke. And we know the United States, its European allies, don't really care about international law. But you're publicly saying, yeah, it's kind of 50-50 if they're committing war crimes. But we'll continue providing the bombs, the 2,000-pound bombs. We'll continue providing the missiles. We'll continue, putting up platitudes and glorified thoughts and prayers for those innocent Palestinians and building, piers that float away after 2 weeks for humanitarian aid. If you don't know if they're committing war crimes, which you do know they are, you're just looking the other way, as we have done, as Saudi Arabia has committed war crimes on the Yemenis people, and Philippine leaders have committed war crimes on its people, and name your country that is in the best interest of U.S. business interests has committed war crimes on its and other people's. You're just looking the other way. But it actually gets worse than that. It's not only that he's uncertain if they're committing war crimes. Let's look into Benjamin Netanyahu himself. On May 31st, Biden laid out a phase ceasefire plan that would end the war and secure the release of hostages. He has continued to pursue the complicated regional deal with Saudi Arabia. Some close to Biden say the only holdout to the broader pact is Netanyahu. The president declines to say as much, but when asked by Time if Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political reasons, Biden admits, quote, there is every reason for people to draw that conclusion. Translated, for those who don't want to read this long-winded story, yes. You don't have to be an expert into Israeli politics to know Benjamin Netanyahu, similar to Trump, has a whole lot of legal problems in his country. He was indicted on corruption and bribery charges. He basically tried to water down and neuter Israel's version of the Supreme Court to change basically the checks and balances, where the Israeli prime minister would have more power than the court in Israel, which was wildly unpopular with Israeli citizens. There were mass protests in Israel before October 7th over that. But if you are basically saying, yes, he's prolonging the war for his own political survival, then you are also saying you, the president, John Kirby, State Department spokesperson, all the ghouls and members of the military-industrial complex have been lying to the American people, have been lying to the world community that we are supporting Israel, or that Israel's main purpose is to defeat Hamas or eradicate Hamas, whatever the hell that means. There is no eradicating Hamas, just like there's no eradicating ISIS. For every one Hamas member you kill, you have created 4 or 5 new fighters who want to get revenge for their sisters and brothers and children and parents and families who have been slaughtered by Israel. ISIS, in many ways, was created by the U.S. and cowboy George W. and Dick gallivanting into Iraq for no reason and slaughtering and wounding nearly 1 million Iraqis. That's how that jihadism and radicalism and terror was formed. but you're saying it's uncertain if Israel is committing war crimes. You're saying, yeah, he's probably prolonging the war for his own political survivor. Netanyahu is not prolonging the war. You, Joe Biden, are prolonging the war because you are the hand that feeds them. We are providing the majority of the weapons for this genocide. And if you're not sure that they're committing war crimes, and if you think that the true reason they are continuing to go further and further as your red line moves further and further into quicksand, then you should not be supporting this. That doesn't mean you're anti-Israel. That doesn't mean you're against supporting Jewish people. That means you are against supporting corrupt leaders in a country like Israel that are killing innocent civilians in Palestine, in Gaza, for their own political purposes. Can you imagine if we were supporting, if he came out and said, oh, yeah, I think we're doing this. We're continuing. The Ukrainians want to continue the war. Vladimir Zelensky wants to continue the war for his own political survival. Do you think that statement would just go without any pushback by politicians, without any pushback by the media? Well, it is America, so probably. I mean, it's amazing. He acts like he's some insignificant bystander to all this, rather than the pivotal player that is pulling the strings behind the scenes and providing the funding for this carnage as Israel moves further and further into Rafah. The death toll right now, over 36,000. I think that's an undercount, frankly. I think it's probably much closer to 40 to 50,000. Lord knows how many bodies are under the rubble. There are other aspects of this interview that were pretty troubling, if you ask me. Let's read this part. During his 40 months in office, events have tested Biden's vision of American world leadership. Alliances haven't been enough to win a new European war in Ukraine. U.S. power and leverage haven't prevented a humanitarian catastrophe in the Middle East. Yes, just some catastrophe that we have not caused, that Biden has not caused. Gotta love how the corporate media writes this stuff as if, oh, it's just some tragic catastrophe. How did it happen? Marked by alleged war crimes. Yes, alleged. Putin is trying to assemble an axis of autocrats from Tehran to Beijing. In China, the U.S. faces an adversary, potentially its equal in economic and military power, that is intent on tearing down the American global order. Well, maybe that American global order needs to be teared down, because America right now is using its, quote, order to fund a genocide. President Xi has told his military to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027, U.S. officials say, raising the possibility of a dark analog to Normandy in Asia. Biden doesn't rule out sending troops to defend Taiwan if China attacked, saying it would depend on the circumstances. Oh, my Lord. Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. We've added more military bases in the Philippines recently. Where next? Where to invade next, as Michael Moore's documentary was titled. I believe that was Michael Moore. I'm not an expert on geopolitical Chinese, Taiwanese relations. I'm sure there are others who would say it is within U.S. interest to defend Taiwan. I don't see that within U.S. interest. How about we defend Flint, Michigan? How about we defend East Palestine, Ohio? How about we defend, right now, Atlanta, Georgia has been without water for days. While its mayor, by the way, the Democratic mayor who has propped up Cop City against the majority of Atlantans' opposition, that militarized police compound that has had protests that we've covered on the ground there to stop it. By the way, the Atlanta police at Cop City would be cross-training with the IDF, just like the NYPD has received training from the IDF. How about we just start defending some cities in America? Not from violence from fellow citizens, but from violence from its own government, who are either poisoning them, blowing up railroads with toxic chemicals on them, having environmental disasters caused by the collusion of corporate America and government. I mean, the list goes on and on. But Biden says, would depend on the circumstances if we're going to go into Taiwan. Oh, boy. Another doozy from this interview. Halfway through our interview, Biden responds to a question about America's relationship with Saudi Arabia by saying that the U.S. has two kinds of alliances. There are values-based, whatever that means, and there are practical-based. Huh. Doesn't that kind of sound like Hillary Clinton? We have a public position and a private position. During the campaign, Biden had sworn to make Saudi Arabia a pariah. One of the first moves in office was to cut off certain arms supplies over the kingdom's war in Yemen, which has displaced 4.5 million people and killed 377,000, including 11,000 children, according to the UN. Soon after, the de facto Saudi ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, met with China's foreign minister and proposed greater cooperation on nuclear energy and security with Beijing, already the kingdom's largest economic partner. Oh, right away, the Biden administration pivoted to that whole practical partnership. A new, quote, great game was afoot with the world dividing between competing Chinese and American spheres of influence. For all Biden's efforts to stimulate a green transition, Saudi Arabia was still providing much of the world's energy. Moreover, the Saudis had expressed willingness during the Trump presidency to normalize relations with Israel, which would tilt the regional balance of power against Iran in the U.S.'s favor. Biden himself traveled to Saudi Arabia in July 2022, bucking a flurry of criticism for meeting with MBS. Yeah, so that whole, make Saudi Arabia a pariah state, that kind of went out the door, huh? Gets worse. Why are we going to continue this farce in Ukraine and continue funding Ukraine forever and ever and ever? Biden says his response has been part of the broader deterrence strategy. Quote, if we ever let Ukraine go down, mark my words, you'll see Poland go, and you'll see all those nations along the actual border of Russia fall, he tells Time. But in other theaters, the high-minded Normandy vision has given way to a different kind of diplomacy. So if we let Russia topple Ukraine, then Poland's going to go. And all the other bordering states with Russia are going to go. Then what's the point of NATO, which I'm not for, by the way? I thought NATO, if they attack Poland or other NATO countries, then the NATO alliance steps in to defend them. So we're going to continue funding the Ukraine war forever and ever for fear that Russia is going to topple Poland and other bordering countries? Huh. It's absolute madness. We have a president, on one hand, who's funding a genocide and whose brain might be stuck in the 1940s, might be stuck to the time of the Normandy invasion, which Biden and his ilk glorify and, wax nostalgia for, of the Allied troops landing in Normandy and defeating the axis of evil and Hitler and restoring something democracy. We have that. Meanwhile, on the other side, we have a convicted felon now who says he wants to be a dictator on day one and who has basically said, to hell with the Palestinians, take the oil, and wants to arrest or deport Americans who protest on behalf of Palestine, on behalf of the Palestinians in Gaza. This is not lesser of two evils. This is shoot me in the head or slowly poison me.